Welcome to True Wild West Love Stories, where every legend hides a heartbeat and every scar tells a truth. Thank you for watching True Wild West Love Stories, where every legend hides a heartbeat. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And tell us in the comments, do you believe redemption still exists in a world like this? The desert held its breath under the sinking sun. The sky burning with streaks of rust, red, and smoky gold as evening crept over the Wild West. Far from any town, any ranch, or any rider bold enough to wander into Apache lands, a lone cowboy lay half buried in dust and sagebrush. His hat had been lost miles back, his horse gone, and his body cut by bullet wounds that had dried into a dark, crusted map upon his skin. He had survived the night before by instinct alone, crawling forward every time consciousness returned, drifting sideways through the waking world like a ghost refusing to move on. He didn't know where he was anymore. He didn't know how long he had been bleeding. All he knew was the endless ache in his limbs and the weight of the sun hammering down on him. Vultures circled overhead, patient and precise, waiting to see whether he would rise or whether the desert would claim him before another nightfall. But fate, in the old lands of the Apache, seldom moved in predictable lines. The cowboy's presence did not go unnoticed. 3 Apache women, returning from the hidden canyon springs where they had gathered herbs and water, saw the trail first. A streak of disturbed sand, the drag of boots, spots of blood that had dried into iron-colored petals upon the ground. Their steps slowed as they followed the trail, each footfall cautious yet firm. The desert belonged to their people, and nothing within it went unexplained. Where the trail ended, they found him still breathing, though faintly, like a fire reduced to coals, but refusing to die out entirely. His skin was scraped raw from crawling. His shirt was torn and stiff with dried blood. A broken rifle lay a few feet away, its stock cracked. Whatever had happened, it had been violent, swift, and unforgiving. The 3 women exchanged steady, wordless glances, each measuring the situation with the weight of ancient instinct passed down through generations. Apache lands were not a place where whites wandered freely, and any cowboy found this deep in their territory meant danger, trouble, or a story soaked in conflict. But the man was helpless, dying, too weak to stand or even turn his head to see who had found him. And among the Apache, their sacred laws held firm. A wounded soul found by a woman was a responsibility placed by the spirits themselves. A wounded man found by 3 women, young, unclaimed, still walking the path between maidenhood and choosing their destinies, was not merely a discovery. It was a fate-binding moment. The man's breath hitched as the tallest of the 3 women knelt beside him, her shadow falling across his face as the sun dipped lower. His pulse fluttered beneath her touch, weak but present. The second woman examined the ground around him, noting the tracks of horses, 3 riders, heavy and swift, moving west. A chase had happened here, a gunfight too, judging by the scattered shells half buried beneath the dust. The cowboy had not simply gotten lost. He had been hunted. The 3rd woman dipped her fingers into her water bag and let cool drops fall against his cracked lips. His throat moved as he swallowed, the first sign of life strong enough to push back the encroaching darkness. The spirits had delivered him to their path, but not for death. No, this man had been placed before them for another reason, one the old traditions whispered about, one seldom spoken aloud except in ceremony. By their sacred law, a man found wounded, defenseless, and at the mercy of an Apache woman owed her his life. If he survived under her care, his fate would become tied to hers. If 3 women discovered him together, and if each took responsibility for him, The binding became deeper, older, reaching back into the roots of tribal custom that intertwined protection, survival, honor, and destiny. And so the decision formed among them long before any words were spoken. The cowboy's life now rested in their hands. His survival would tie him irrevocably to each of them. Gathering long branches and woven straps from their packs, the women fashioned a stretcher. With practiced skill and silent determination, they lifted his battered body onto it. The cowboy barely stirred, lost within a haze of exhaustion and half-conscious dreams where the world spun in and out of focus. As the women carried him toward the hidden canyon where their camp lay tucked between towering red stone walls, the desert winds shifted, stirring sand across the trail behind them. The vultures wheeled away, disappointed, their dark silhouettes fading into the dusk. The sun finally slipped beneath the horizon, leaving the land bathed in the deep indigo of approaching night. Inside the canyon, the women's home glowed warmly with cooking fires, drying herbs, and woven shelters blending into the natural rock. The canyon was a sanctuary, a place protected from both raiders and settlers, known only to a few within their tribe. Here, no enemy could easily approach without alerting every ear attuned to the whisper of stone and wind. The stretcher was placed inside one of the shelters where the eldest of the three prepared herbs and poultices, grinding them into healing salves. The second built a fire, boiling water and preparing clean cloths. The third washed the cowboy's wounds, her touch steady and sure as she removed the dirt and dried blood that clung to him. Through it all, the cowboy drifted between consciousness and fever, unable to speak or understand where he had been taken. He did not know the law he had invoked simply by surviving in their path. He did not yet grasp that his fate had shifted, that three women had taken responsibility for him, and that within Apache tradition, such responsibility was never a small or temporary thing. Outside the shelter, night fell deeper, and the canyon grew silent except for the faint crackle of fire and the soft rustle of blankets. The women worked tirelessly, driven by the gravity of what had begun. Whether the cowboy knew it or not, the moment they found him changed all of their lives. For in Apache law, if a man lived through the healing offered by a woman, or in this rare case, three, he became bound to them as husband, protector, and partner. Such unions were not born of choice, but of destiny and spiritual design, and destiny had now breathed upon this canyon with the faint, fragile heartbeat of a wounded cowboy. Whether he would live to see morning remained uncertain. Whether he would fulfill the law rested in the hands of the spirits and the strength within his battered body. But the women knew one thing with absolute clarity. If he survived, their lives would never be the same. And as the first stars shimmered over the canyon, the cowboy's breathing steadied just enough to mark the beginning of everything that would follow. The night settled deeply over the hidden canyon, casting long shadows against the rock walls as the fire inside the healing shelter softened to a warm glow. The cowboy lay upon woven blankets, his breathing shallow but steady, each rise and fall of his chest a fragile promise of survival. The Apache women watching over him worked with patience and quiet purpose, aware that every hour he lived was another step deeper into the binding destiny laid upon them by the old spirits. The eldest of the three women, known among her people for her knowledge of healing, prepared a mixture of desert willow and sage, grinding the leaves into a thick paste meant to draw out infection. Her hands moved with the certainty of tradition, passed down from generations of women before her. She pressed the mixture against the cowboy's wounds, her face calm despite the severity of his injuries. She understood well that the spirits guided her, and that the stranger had not been placed in their path without reason. The second woman tended to his fever, dipping a cloth into cool water from the canyon's spring and laying it across his brow. Her expression held curiosity and caution in equal measure as she studied his features, the sharp angles softened by exhaustion, the sunburned skin of someone used to life under open skies, the rough stubble of a man who had faced danger long before the bullets found him. She felt a stirring deep within her, not of affection but of responsibility. The sacred law was larger than personal feeling, yet feelings often grew from the paths destiny carved. The youngest of the three watched the cowboy closely, noting every twitch of his hands, every shift in his breathing. She sensed something in him that set him apart from others who wandered too close to Apache lands, something wounded deeper than the flesh, something carrying stories far heavier than the saddlebag he no longer possessed. Her instincts told her that his arrival carried weight, not only for their futures, but for their tribe's balance with the world outside the canyon. As hours drifted by, the cowboy slipped in and out of consciousness. Sometimes his body shivered from fever, other times it lay still and heavy, as if the world had released him. In his dreams he saw flashes of the ambush, 3 riders emerging from behind a ridge, gunfire erupting, his horse stumbling beneath him, and the desperate crawl through the desert that followed. His mind, clouded by pain, replayed the chaos without forming clear meaning. Yet one thing anchored him, the feeling of cool water against his lips earlier, a sensation too gentle to belong to the dust and loneliness of his struggle. Outside the shelter, the canyon slept. The fires burned low, warm against the chilled night air. Owls watched from the cliffs, and the wind carried the faint scent of juniper. The Apache camp, though small, held the quiet strength of a people deeply rooted in their land. By dawn, the cowboy's fever broke. The women sensed the shift immediately, the sudden ease in his breathing, the calmer expression settling upon his face. His survival was no longer a question of hours, but of days. And with that realization came another. The sacred law had taken hold. The binding was no longer a possibility, but a certainty. Among the Apache, such a bond was not merely symbolic. It meant responsibility, protection, and an intertwining of lives. The women knew that once he rose from his bedding, the cowboy would stand not as an outsider, but as a man woven into their fates. His presence would alter their future, their roles, and even their relationships within the tribe. A man with 3 wives, chosen by destiny rather than tradition, would draw questions, curiosity, and perhaps resistance. Yet the law was older than the tribe itself, and no elder could argue with the will of the spirits. As the sun rose above the canyon walls, its warm light filtered into the shelter. The eldest woman checked the cowboy's wounds, noting that the herbs had begun to work. The raw edges no longer carried the heat of infection, and the bleeding had stopped. His body, though battered, showed the resilience of someone who had survived long trails, harsh winters, and men determined to end him. His strength, though dormant, lingered beneath the surface. By midday, he stirred more fully, his eyelids fluttering as he tried to make sense of the shapes around him. His vision blurred, but he recognized the presence of people, 3 shadows moving with gentle deliberation, 3 figures who seemed at once familiar and unknown. His mind struggled to piece together where he was and how he had come to be here. But the women did not rush him. They watched silently, understanding that clarity would return in its own time. They focused instead on preparing food for the day, gathering fresh water, and checking their traps along the canyon's walls. Life continued as the sun climbed higher, even as the cowboy's awareness slowly returned to him. Later in the afternoon, As the canyon warmed under the golden light, the cowboy attempted to sit up. His body protested immediately, pain flaring sharply along his ribs, his arm trembling with the effort. He collapsed back onto the blankets, exhausted by the smallest movement. The women noticed, each pausing in her tasks, but allowing him to try. Strength had to rebuild slowly. Survival was not reclaimed in a single moment, but through many fragile ones. The youngest woman placed a woven cloth beneath his head to elevate him slightly. The cowboy sighed, his body easing into the new position. Though he lacked the strength to stand or speak, something in him seemed to recognize that he was safer than he had been in a long time. By the time evening approached again, the camp returned to its quiet rhythm. Birds chirped along the canyon ridges, while distant horses, belonging to the tribe's small herd, grazed near the spring. The cowboy drifted into rest once more, but this time without fever or confusion. His body sought healing, and the peace of the canyon answered that call. The 3 Apache women gathered near the entrance of the shelter, each contemplating the days ahead. They had found a wounded stranger, saved him, and in doing so had tied him to their destinies. Life in the canyon would not remain unchanged. His past would catch up eventually. Whoever had shot him might already be searching, and when he learned of the sacred law, they did not know how he would accept it. But destiny had chosen, and the canyon listened. As night fell once more, the cowboy breathed steadily, his life now intertwined with 3 women who had saved him, claimed him, and unknowingly stepped toward a future none of them could yet see. Morning broke over the hidden canyon with a pale golden light that spilled across the rock walls and seeped into the shelter where the wounded cowboy lay. The night had passed without fever, without the rapid breaths that had signaled danger before. Instead, his chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, his strength returning in slow, cautious waves. The 3 Apache women stirred before sunrise, each moving through the camp with quiet efficiency, preparing for another day of tending to the man the spirits had put in their path. The eldest woman checked his wounds first. The herbs had done their work through the night, drawing out the heat and sealing the raw edges. A protective layer of hardened poultice clung to his skin, and the discoloration around his injuries had lightened. Though still weak, the cowboy no longer hovered between life and death. He had crossed a boundary into recovery, however gradual that recovery might be. The second woman carried water from the spring, her footsteps light on the packed earth as she returned to the shelter. She had spent years learning to observe the smallest signs, the way a wounded man shifted under his blankets, the way his brow relaxed when pain eased. She noticed these details now as she watched him breathe. His hands, once curled tightly at his sides, now lay open and relaxed against the blankets. His expression, no longer twisted by suffering, held a faint calmness. The youngest of the 3 gathered fresh herbs to replace the ones that had served their purpose through the night. She crushed them into a smooth paste, humming a low melody that echoed softly off the canyon walls. Though she did not look at the cowboy often, she felt his presence deeply, an unfamiliar energy in their sanctuary, a fate interwoven with their own in a way she could not yet understand. She sensed that his story, whatever it was, carried weight, not only for them, but for the tribe beyond the canyon. By mid-morning, the cowboy opened his eyes fully for the first time without fever clouding his vision. The world came into focus slowly, the woven blankets beneath him, the red sandstone ceiling of the shelter, the soft glow of a fire still smoldering from the night. He felt the cool air drifting in from the canyon, carrying the scent of juniper and damp stone. His body ached everywhere, his ribs felt bruised to the bone, and his arm lay stiff at his side. But the overwhelming sense of helplessness had faded. His gaze drifted toward the shadows moving near him, the silhouettes of the three women. They worked in calm unison, moving around him with the same steady rhythm of desert winds shaping the canyon walls. They did not speak, yet their actions communicated everything necessary. The cowboy sensed a tremendous steadiness in their presence, something rooted and ancient. He tried again to sit up. This time, though pain radiated through his body, he managed to lift his shoulders from the bedding. His muscles trembled under the strain, but he refused to sink back down immediately. His instinct told him he had to regain strength, and soon. The world outside these canyon walls felt vast and uncertain, and the memory of gunfire still echoed faintly in the back of his mind. The eldest woman approached him, steadying his movement with a firm hand. Her touch was neither harsh nor hesitant. It carried the authority of someone who had guided many wounded souls before him. The cowboy allowed himself to lean back into her support, realizing he lacked the strength to resist, even if he wished to. He understood that survival meant surrendering, at least for now, to the care these women offered. As the day stretched onward, the cowboy gained a little clarity. He could not yet move freely, but he could focus. He watched the women as they busied themselves around the camp. They tended to their duties with purpose, preparing hides, cleaning tools, weaving rope, and checking traps. Their daily life unfolded in a rhythm older than the nearest frontier towns and untouched by the chaos of the world beyond. Although he could not speak, memory stirred within him. He remembered his horse collapsing, remembered the shooting, remembered crawling through the desert. But the faces of the attackers remained blurred, lost in the haze of panic and exhaustion. All he knew with certainty was that danger had hunted him mercilessly, and that danger would not simply release its grip because he had found temporary refuge. At midday, one of the tribe's elders arrived at the canyon, having sensed a disturbance in the air. The elder paused at the entrance to the shelter, observing the stranger inside. His expression did not shift, yet the weight of the sacred law rested heavily between the canyon stones. The presence of the cowboy signaled a binding that none could challenge. The three women stood near the shelter as the elder considered the scene. The cowboy's survival, the dedication of the women, and the undeniable pull of destiny formed a bond stronger than any spoken oath. The law was clear. A man saved by a woman was tied to her fate. A man saved by three women was bound to each of them. The elder nodded once, acknowledging the inevitable. The women's lives had changed. The cowboy's life had changed. The tribe's future would adjust accordingly. That evening, the cowboy managed to stand, though only for a brief moment. His legs trembled violently, and sweat gathered at his brow as he fought to remain upright. The youngest woman stood ready, her hands lightly guiding him back to the blankets. It had taken nearly all his strength just to rise. Yet that small moment, the ability to stand at all, marked a turning point. The cowboy felt a spark reawaken within him, a sense of purpose, a will to survive not only the wounds, but the mysteries of this new life that had taken hold around him. Night fell once more. The canyon bathed in moonlight that shimmered like silver water across the stone walls. The cowboy lay awake longer than before, listening to the nighttime sounds, the whisper of wind, the distant call of a coyote, the soft movement of the women preparing for rest. He felt the pull of something greater than himself, a destiny he did not understand, a law he did not yet know. But even without knowing, he sensed that his life was no longer his alone. And beyond the canyon, far across the desert, the three men who had hunted him pressed onward following faint traces, driven by purpose, unaware that their chase had led him into the arms of spirits themselves. Their approach would soon collide with the ancient bind that now claimed him. The canyon rose in warm golden light as dawn washed over the Apache camp. The cowboy woke earlier than usual, no longer drifting in and out of pain-fueled dreams, but resting in clear awareness. His body remained weak, his muscles aching with every breath, yet he sensed the shift within himself the moment when a wounded man transitions from helplessness to determination. The night had been kind, allowing him more rest than he had known in weeks, and the morning greeted him with the quiet hum of life unfolding calmly around him. The 3 Apache women had already left the shelter, moving through their daily tasks with practiced precision. Their silhouettes crossed the canyon floor like graceful shadows, each one tending to the needs of the camp. The eldest prepared herbs near the fire, grinding leaves and roots into pastes that filled the air with a sharp, earthy scent. The second collected water, her footsteps light against the stone. The youngest tended to the small herd of horses that grazed near the canyon walls, brushing their coats and checking their reins. The cowboy watched them silently, realizing with each passing moment that these women had become his anchors. They had nursed him through fever and blood loss, sheltered him in their hidden sanctuary, and carried him through the darkest hours of his survival. Their presence was steady, unwavering, a force stronger than any weapon he had ever held. When he finally attempted to sit up, his body protested but did not fail him. His muscles trembled, but his breath steadied. A sense of accomplishment flickered through him. The first steps of recovery had begun. The eldest woman noticed the movement and approached him with the calm authority she carried so effortlessly. She used her hands to support him, examining his wounds with the same practiced touch she had used since the day they found him. Her expression revealed a mixture of relief and acceptance. He was healing, and with that healing came the unavoidable truth of the sacred law that bound his fate to theirs. Later in the morning, the cowboy rose to his feet with the women's guidance. The effort drew sweat across his brow, and every muscle quivered under the strain, but he remained standing. His first full moment, upright inside the canyon, felt like stepping into a new existence, an existence tied to the land, tied to the tribe, and tied to the 3 women who had saved him. The camp operated in rhythm around him, and as he took slow steps outside the shelter, he saw the world he now existed in. The red canyon walls towered overhead, worn smooth by centuries of wind. The distant echo of running water filled the air, and the ground beneath his feet felt solid and familiar. He understood then why the Apache guarded this place so fiercely. It was more than land. It was sanctuary, history, and spirit in one breath. The tribe's elder returned later that day, accompanied by 2 others who carried supplies. Their features remained composed, yet their eyes lingered on the cowboy. His presence represented change, something rare among the Apache, whose traditions lived in harmony with the cycles of the land. A man saved by 3 women was not a small matter. It marked a turning point for each of them and for the tribe as a whole. The cowboy watched as the elder assessed the camp, and then stood silent near the shelter. Though words passed quietly between the elder and the 3 women, none was spoken aloud in his presence. Yet the cowboy could read the meaning in their faces. The law had been acknowledged. The spirits had spoken. His fate was sealed. He felt a weight settle upon him, not a burden, but a responsibility. These women had given him life, and by ancient rule, he owed them loyalty, protection, and partnership. Whether he understood their customs fully or not, the bond had taken shape. As the day went on, the cowboy regained small pieces of strength. He ate for the first time in days, consuming the herbs, roots, and soft grinds offered to him. He drank cool water from the spring, feeling the refreshing flow ease down his throat. The nourishment fueled his body, awakening dormant muscles and steadying his breath. The three women continued to watch over him, not out of fear or uncertainty, but because fate had woven their paths together in a way none of them could walk away from. Even as they tended to their chores, their gazes returned to him, silently evaluating his progress. Meanwhile, beyond the sanctuary of the canyon, trouble grew nearer. Across the desert, the three men who had shot him followed the faint trail left behind. Their horses moved tirelessly, guided by broken twigs, disturbed sand, and the occasional faint drop of blood that had dried under the relentless sun. They were hunters, men accustomed to long pursuits, driven by a mission that refused to fade with distance. Now that the cowboy had rested long enough to think clearly, fragmented memories returned. He recalled the men who hunted him, cold faces, relentless determination, and eyes filled with something dangerous. They were not gunslingers seeking revenge or bounty hunters chasing coin. Their purpose had been personal, deadly, and unwavering. Whoever they were, they would not stop simply because the cowboy had disappeared into the wilderness. Inside the canyon, evening descended again. The orange glow of sunset washed across the rock walls, casting long shadows that stretched across the camp. The cowboy settled himself near the fire for warmth, wrapped in a woven blanket that carried the scent of sage and smoke. The Apache women sat nearby, weaving rope and preparing herbs. Their presence felt both protective and expectant. The cowboy sensed the weight of their gaze upon him, the unspoken connection threading between them. Though none spoke, the truth of the sacred law hung in the air. He understood that fate had brought him here. He understood that the spirits of this land had claimed him. And he understood that his life, once a wandering trail of uncertainty, now intertwined with three women whose destinies had merged with his own. As the night deepened, the canyon seemed to breathe in harmony with the wind. Sparks rose from the fire, drifting upward like tiny stars. The cowboy's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion, but his mind remained alert, aware of the shifting world beyond the canyon walls. For somewhere in the vast desert, the hunters had found a new clue, his broken rifle half buried in the sand. And with renewed purpose, they spurred their horses toward the canyon unknowingly. Their arrival would soon test the fate that bound the cowboy to the three Apache women. The red moon rose over the desert like a burning omen, spilling crimson light across the land and painting the canyons in shades of blood and prophecy. The Apache believed such a moon revealed hidden truths and stripped away disguises the way wind peeled sand from buried relics. For the three women, Nellie, Tulla, and Sani, it was a night they had been preparing for since the moment they carried the wounded cowboy from death's edge and invoked the sacred vow binding his fate. To theirs, and for him, Elias Crow, it was the night everything he thought he understood about loyalty, survival, and belonging would be tested. The wind was sharp, with the scent of juniper and distant storms, as Elias stood among the towering red rocks that created a natural amphitheater. The Apache called this place the spine of the earth, where spirits were said to whisper through cracks in stone and listen to the confessions of those brave enough to face them. Every shadow looked alive beneath the copper glow, and every grain of sand seemed to hold ancient breath. Elias's body still carried the scars of his earlier battle scars. The three women had healed with their hands, herbs, and relentless vigilance. Yet the deeper wounds were the ones inside him, the guilt of the men he had killed to survive, the betrayal of the gang that once called him brother, and the crushing fear that he did not deserve. The bond these women had made with him. He felt like an intruder in a sacred world, a trespasser on a promise he had not earned. Nellie watched him quietly from the ridge, her dark hair brushing the wind, her eyes filled with a calm severity that always made Elias feel both judged and protected. She was the eldest, the one who carried the weight of leadership, the one who understood the laws more deeply than anyone. Her posture was steady, but her heartbeat, heard only by her sisters, was restless. She knew the night would either solidify their claim to the cowboy or break their triad forever. Tala paced lower on the rocks, restless as an untamed mare. Her spirit was fire, and the red moon fed it, making her senses sharp and her emotions turbulent. She feared losing Elias not to death, but to the world he came from, the world of guns, saloons, wanted posters, and betrayals. She sensed a pull in him, a lingering connection to something beyond their homeland, something that threatened the delicate bond forming between them. Sanny stood closest to Elias, her gentle strength grounding the air around them. She felt his unease like a tremor under her feet. Despite her quiet nature, she sensed the deeper spiritual meaning of the red moon's arrival. The ancestors would judge the cowboy's heart tonight, and judgment could be swift, unforgiving, or unexpectedly merciful. The ceremony began with silence, a silence so deep it felt like the land itself was holding its breath. The three sisters circled Elias slowly, each carrying an object representing a part of his fate. Nellie carried a stone carved with ancient symbols, representing the unbreakable law that bound them. Tala carried a burning torch, representing the fire of life they had given back to him. Sanny held a clay bowl filled with water from a sacred spring, representing renewal and the cleansing of past sins. Elias felt the weight of their steps, the gravity of the ritual, and the intensity of the world around him. Though he could not understand the full meaning of their movements, he understood the seriousness, the sense that something irreversibly important was being decided. The sisters stopped before him, forming the points of a triangle, and the red moon cast their shadows long and sharp across the sand. Nellie lowered her head. Her voice carried not with sound, but with ritual presence. She invoked the law of the binding moon, the vow that when an outsider was saved under the protection of the triad, he became their husband in spirit, protected by them, responsible to them, and forever part of their future. But the law demanded proof of loyalty. Elias had been healed, sheltered, and defended, but tonight he would have to show that he accepted the bond with truth in his heart. Tala stepped forward, her fire-lit torch blazing like the sun, the flames reflected in Elias's eyes, revealing not fear but conflict. The trial demanded he confront his past not with words, but with action. The fire represented the life he had taken and the life he had been given. It demanded he acknowledge that the man he once was could not continue. Tala's gaze burned with hope and warning. Sanny lifted the clay bowl, offering the possibility of rebirth. The water shimmered beneath the red glow, rippling with reflections of the sky. It symbolized forgiveness, but forgiveness came with cost. He had to release his ties to the world beyond their tribe. It was not a test of identity, it was a test of commitment. Elias felt the truth strike him like a hammer. To belong here meant leaving behind the fractured pieces of his former life. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the desert, as if ancestors signaled their attention. Elias stood in the center, the stones cold beneath his boots, the heat of Tala's flame warming one side of his face, while the cool purity of Sanny's water beckoned on the other. Every breath he took felt like stepping closer to a precipice he could not yet see. He had been a loner, a drifter, a survivor, never anchored, never claimed, never loved in a way that demanded he give something of himself in return. Yet the Apache women had risked everything for him, their status, their safety, their sacred customs. They had fought off danger, nurtured his wounds, and offered him a place in their trio, not as a possession, but as a part of something ancient and enduring. For the first time in his wandering life, someone wanted him, not for what he could fight or steal or shoot, but for who he might become. Slowly, deliberately, he knelt. The wind stopped, the fire stilled, even the desert seemed to listen. Tala's breath hitched, Sani's heart fluttered, Nayli closed her eyes, knowing the ancestors were watching. Elias placed one hand on Nayli's carved stone, accepting the law. He touched Tala's flame, embracing the fire of change despite the sting. And he dipped his fingers into Sani's water, letting it run down his skin like a baptism into a life he never thought he could have. The red moon pulsed overhead, bathing him in its fierce light. The trial was not over, but the choice had been made. And as the sisters stepped back, each exchanging glances filled with hope, fear, and awe, a distant gunshot echoed through the canyons, shattering the stillness and announcing that the world he thought he left behind had found him. The ceremony had awakened powerful forces, some sacred, some deadly, and both were coming for him. The gunshot rolled across the desert like a thunderclap ripped from the throat of the earth. It cut through the sacred silence of the red moon ceremony, shattering the fragile stillness the four of them had fought to protect. The echoes bounced from cliff to canyon, carrying a message of intrusion, an unwelcome reminder that the world Elias Crow had tried to leave behind had not forgotten him. Nayli's posture sharpened, instinct pulling her toward the threat. Tala's fire-filled spirit surged, burning with protective fury. Sani, gentle yet fierce in her quiet strength, stood ready to face whatever shadows stalked their horizon. The binding ritual had completed its first phase, but the final acceptance, the sealing of Elias's place in their triad, could not proceed until danger was confronted. The red moon demanded truth, and truth always revealed its teeth. Elias felt his heart pound like hooves on dry ground. The ancestors may have witnessed his choice, but the world of flesh and blood was testing it. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the rock formations, shapes moved with purpose. Elias sensed the familiar rhythm of pursuit, the same cold determination he once carried as a hunted man. His former gang, or what remained of them, had tracked him across the desert like wolves scenting a wounded elk. The shadows grew thicker near the far ridge, where the rock walls formed a jagged passage. The air tasted of dust and hot metal, and the red moon painted every movement with sinister clarity. Elias knew this challenge would define the future he had chosen. He was no longer a lone drifter surviving on instinct, nor a man running from ghosts. He was bound to three women who had risked their lives for him, and now the time had come to risk his for theirs. The sisters positioned themselves in a crescent around him, each prepared to defend the vow that tied their destinies together. Nayli moved with the precision of a seasoned warrior, her steps measured and grounded. Tala's energy crackled, vibrant and fierce, ready to strike at any moment. Sani's calm presence served as a steady anchor, her spirit aligned with the whispers of their ancestors. The first intruder emerged a dark silhouette sliding between boulders, glinting under the moon's crimson light. Others followed, stepping into the open like predators testing the air. Elias recognized the shapes, the gait, the unmistakable tension in their shoulders. These were men who had once ridden beside him, shared campfires and stolen loot, laughed over the spoils of violence. But what they wanted now was the bounty on his head, a price high enough to make any lingering loyalty evaporate, like dew in the desert sun. The moment transformed, the ground felt alive beneath their feet, pulsing with ancient power stirred by the sacred ceremony. Elias felt the bond with the Apache women tightening like a protective shield around him. The trial had not ended. It simply shifted from the spiritual to the physical world. The ancestors would now watch how fiercely he defended the vow he had chosen. The intruders advanced, their boots scattering dust, their shadows long and layered. Elias moved in front of the sisters, his stance echoing the silent promise he had made during the ritual. He would no longer run. He would no longer hide behind guilt or fear or memories of who he had been. The man standing here tonight was shaped not by his past sins, but by the bond carved into the very air of this sacred place. The confrontation erupted like a storm. The red moon lit the chaos in vivid crimson, illuminating every desperate motion. Elias fought with a ferocity born from purpose, no longer driven by survival alone, but by the fierce protectiveness blooming within him. Naily struck with calculated power, each movement efficient and disciplined. Tala fought like wildfire, unpredictable and potent. Sani moved with grace and precision, every strike infused with ancestral guidance. Dust rose in clouds, mixing with streaks of moonlight. The sound of struggle collided with the eerie stillness of the desert. The earth seemed to tremble beneath their feet, as if acknowledging the clash of two worlds, one ending, the other beginning. Elias's strength waned as the battle stretched on, his earlier wounds reminding him of their presence. Yet every time he faltered, one of the sisters stepped in, their unity turning the tide of the conflict. The intruders faltered under the fierce defense, their resolve cracking under the combined force of the four who now fought as a single, integrated spirit. One by one, the attackers fell back, their confidence crumbling. The red moon revealed their fear, a fear not of death, but of the power that bound Elias to the Apache women. It was a power deeper than laws carved by men, older than the desert itself. When the final intruder retreated into the shadows, limping and defeated, the desert returned to its stillness. The wind stopped, the night exhaled. Elias staggered, breath heavy, body burning with exhaustion, but he stood, and the sisters stood with him, surrounding him in a quiet, unbroken circle. The danger had passed, but the binding ritual required closure. Under the red moon, the ancestors waited. Naily stepped forward, recognizing that the outcome of the battle had completed what the ritual had begun. Elias had proven his loyalty not with words, but with strength, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. Tala's fierce spirit softened, her trust solidifying like metal cooling in a forge. Sani lifted the clay bowl once more, its water reflecting the shifting moonlight. Elias placed his hand upon the symbols carved in stone, accepting their law. He allowed the remnants of Tala's flame to purify his skin, accepting change and responsibility. And he touched the sacred water once more, sealing his rebirth into a new life. The red moon blazed brighter, casting a final blessing across them. The desert seemed to bow, wind rising in a gentle swirl, encircling the newly formed bond. Elias Crow was no longer a wandering cowboy, no longer a man chased by his past. He was tied by sacred law, heart, and destiny to 3 Apache women whose spirits had chosen him as theirs. As the 4 of them stood beneath the fading red glow, the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, casting soft gold over the blood-painted sands. A new chapter of their lives awaited, one shaped by challenges, unity, and a bond older than memory. But for now the desert rested, the vow sealed, and the future open like a wide, wild horizon stretching endlessly before them. And somewhere beyond that horizon, the world kept moving quiet, distant, and unaware of the sacred promise forged under the red moon.